What's going on, everybody? In this video, I wanted to give you a Workhorse update. They did release earnings a couple of days ago. We're going to go over some of the results there, as well as a look at the chart. So let's get into this Workhorse video, ticker WKHS. If you like these videos, consider hitting the like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, check out the links down below, and consider joining my membership to show your support. Now, I will leave this press release down below for you, but let's look over a couple things here. First off, some words from the CEO. Our second quarter performance demonstrates the ongoing progress we're making on our path forward to grow and further position Workhorse for success. During the quarter, we continued to advance our product roadmaps, ramp up production, and expand our commercial relationships. We're pleased to increase production and delivery of our W4CCs and delivered our first W750 to a customer. The W56 program is on track to begin production in the third quarter of this year. Our aerospace business is continuing to make important strides, including signing our first commercial drone purchase order and recording our first sales of Horsefly during the second quarter. Aero also was awarded a $900,000 follow-up grant for drone-based sensor work in Mississippi in support of the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. Now, as for their vehicles, they received purchase orders for 62 vehicles, including the first 2 purchase orders for the W56, and they delivered 42 Class 4s, meaning the W4CC and the W750 vehicles, to customers as Workhorse expands its dealer network. And also the dealer network. They established Burr Truck and Trailer Sales as the first certified Workhorse dealer in New York. They established EVC/Smyrna Truck as Workhorse's first EV dealer and bodybuilder in Georgia. Western Truck Exchange was added to their existing California dealers. They do have another one there as well. And they shipped 53 Tropos vehicles year to date, which were assembled in Union City. And they do expect volume of those vehicles to increase in the second half of 2023. And they also completed phase 1 of the company's ERP system, which should support operational efficiencies as they ramp up production. Now, I'll leave the press release down below for you, but I'll also leave their actual earnings call. I suggest you listen to it. But looking over this dealership network, I've covered this in previous videos, but because of these different dealership networks they now have manufacturing licenses and are authorized to sell in 23 key states. And they are targeting additional dealers along the I-5 and I-95 corridor, southeast and southwest regions. And I do expect we'll be hearing about more EV dealers coming aboard soon, giving Workhorse more availability in even more states. And in the earnings call, they did give an update on the Stables and Stalls initiative. They expanded their route assignments by 20%. And by the way, this is a deal they're doing to basically get some real-world learning experience. They started out with, I believe, 1 EV and 9 regular gas vehicles, and now they have 5 Class 4 EV units in that delivery fleet. And they are on track to add some W56 vehicles in Q4 of 2023, and they are reviewing options to establish a second location in an incentive-based state. But this is basically a project they're doing to prove that EVs can be a last-mile delivery vehicle, and FedEx is obviously keeping an eye on what's going on here. And then here's another slide going over their vehicles essentially. The W4CCs have been rolling out. As I mentioned, they received orders for the Class 4 vehicles and delivered 42 vehicles to customers. Now, looking at the W750, they had a tough launch, and they said in the testing, I believe this was the vehicle that they had some brackets break during the testing, and they did mention there was another EV that they didn't name, that the vehicle just like broke down during the testing, but that wasn't Workhorse's vehicle that actually broke down. They actually say that their drivetrain is very solid, and it was certain brackets not pertaining to the drivetrain that broke, so they're going to probably reinforce those, and that won't be an issue moving forwards. But they did have a first customer shipment in June of the W750s. 5 of these units are actually operating at the Stables and Stalls, and they said they're capable of building and shipping at least 50 units, give or take, in 2023. So in the next earnings, we'll probably see these start rolling out more. And then as for the W56, they're on track for production in Q3 of 2023. They actually did receive 2 orders, and they expect to send some demo units to major fleets in Q4, but they are finally starting to roll out their own vehicles. You know, they discontinued the C1000, which was created under the previous Workhorse. They saw that it just didn't make sense to keep that vehicle going, and they essentially, started fresh on their own vehicles, and now those are already starting to roll out. It's great to see that they are making some progress. Now, looking at the drones, as I said, they signed their first commercial drone purchase. They completed demonstrations of simultaneous delivery by multiple aircraft for 2 potential last mile delivery customers, and they completed field scanning projects in Arkansas and Mississippi to support the USDA government programs, and received that $900,000 grant as I mentioned, and they do expect to commence flying in Q3 of 2023 regarding that grant. Now looking at the Halo, they delivered the platform in 142 days, and they've had multiple demonstrations with the DoD and US government departments, also successfully conducted field testing internationally, so we may start seeing some international sales for their Halo drone. And they are continuing to explore additional projects with the federal and state governments, so we may in the future see some huge government grants and some big purchases made by the states and by governments. And those drones are 10 to 15 pound payload capacity with a range of 10 to 15 miles. Now let's look at their sales. They did miss revenue estimates, and that's likely why this sold off a bit, along with some dilution, and we'll get into that and my thoughts on that in a second here. But basically their sales were about 4 million compared to 0 million in the same period last year. And this increase in sales was obviously due to the W4CCs that they've been starting to roll out here. Now the cost of these sales increased to 8.4 million from 3 million in the same period last year. The increase was due to the 4.8 million increase in costs related to vehicle sales and a 0.6 million increase in employee compensation and related expenses. Now research and development was relatively flat. They're spending right around 5 million there. SG&A increased 1 million from 13 million to 14 million. So hopefully as they continue to ramp the vehicles up, these expenses don't continue to rise up at a higher rate than the actual sales they're making. Now looking at guidance, they say based on improved clarity gained from the emerging commercial EV market experience in the first half of the year, Workhorse now expects to generate between 65 to 85 million in revenue for calendar year 2023, due primarily to 2 factors: the availability of HVIP vouchers through Green Power Motor for the W4s and W750s, as well as longer than expected certification testing, which may delay the W56 production. So it looks like they did drop their revenue expectations for the 2023 year, and of course there are speed bumps along the way. Things don't always go perfectly as planned, but having said that, it is nice to see that they are ramping up their sales, although not to the extent that they had hoped. Now I did want to show you on the chart and talk about dilution a little bit. They did say that they brought 25 million shares into the market, bringing them $20 million in cash essentially. So what happened to the stock price while they were diluting these shares? Honestly, throughout the quarter, it stayed relatively sideways. There hasn't been a huge sell-off, which we've seen actually with a lot of small caps. We've seen just insane sell-offs. Stocks like Senseonics, stocks like Bingo, many other small caps have sold off during this quarter. Workhorse, for the most part, was relatively flat, trading right around 85 cents to $1. So that's one thing to consider is throughout all this dilution, this 25 million shares, it really didn't push the price down that much. There are essentially enough buyers to pick up that extra weight and keep the stock price relatively flat, relatively sideways. And of course, we don't want to see dilution necessarily, but when you're looking at the company long term, that dilution that they used will help them further as a business to continue to grow. But of course, you know, looking at it short term to mid term, you really don't want to see dilution. But big surprise, this is a small cap, risky, unprofitable stock, and they will need to dilute or they will need to pull out debt at currently a very high interest rate. But it is now sitting at 89 cents. The chart is still bearish. We are under the moving averages, and they are in a bearish order. And looking at the EMAs, it's the same story there. We are under all 3 EMAs, and they are in a bearish order as well. If you don't yet have Workhorse and you aren't believing in it long term, I would personally wait to start a position. I would wait until things start looking better, until we start seeing these moving averages and EMAs start crossing over, when you see the shorter term timeframes breaking back above the longer term timeframes. Now, my thoughts on Workhorse is they are doing what they can to continue to grow. They're adding dealership networks, they're starting to see sales from drones, and they are increasing production of their vehicles. But it is of course a negative that they had to dilute some shares to bring in more capital. And I didn't mention this, but they are still debt free, which is definitely a good thing. However, them being unprofitable means we may see some dilution again in the future. But let me know what you guys think about Workhorse. If you listened to the call, what's the most important thing you got out of it? Do you still believe in the vision that they have? Of course, as we get more into the future, there's more of a demand for EVs. Companies will be forced to add EVs to their fleet of vehicles, and hopefully Workhorse will be one of those companies considered. I do expect moving forward to see more dealerships added onto the network, bringing them more potential sales in more states. I expect to see further sales of drones. To me, these new execs are starting to prove themselves. They are proving that they can create these products and bring some sales into this company. And hopefully one day they can be a major player in the EV last mile delivery space, along with drones as well. But thanks as always for watching, guys, and I'll catch you a bit later.